Welcome to Canada.
I am a settler.
Why is this a problem? This is racial segregation. Hello everyone, Masha Kleiner here. I've been writing anti-Semitism digest for over 18 months, and occasionally I fell into the temptation to include incidents that didn't quite fit. At first I thought these items were just stupid things that occur randomly, but then I tried to find a pattern. And the seemingly random incidents are manifestations of problems in our societies that aren't directly related to Jews and Israel, but stem from the same nature that anti Semitism. Rising anti Semitism is always an indication of other troubles in the society, and every troubled society resorts to anti Semitism. So let's explore this together. Have you ever heard about Andriy? Surprisingly, many readers of my Substack have. Usually the number is significantly lower. If you know what UNDRIP is, just skip a few minutes forward. UNDRIP stands for the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. It was adopted by the UN in 2007. The document opens with the overall positive affirmation that indigenous peoples are equal to all other people. In the next few paragraphs, the declaration reminds us that indigenous peoples have suffered from historic injustices and recognizes the urgent need to respect and promote the inherent rights of the indigenous peoples. All people have suffered historical injustices, and all people need respect. If all people are equal, why do indigenous people require a dedicated document to outline their rights? The declaration consists of 46 articles, the majority of which grant special rights to indigenous people on top of the rights that both indigenous and non-indigenous people have. It also assigns additional obligations for states towards its indigenous people, either individuals or collectives. Ironically, UNDRIP does not define who an indigenous person is and who is not. In the spirit of the era, it states that indigenous people have the right to determine their own identity or membership. Another, even more bitter irony lies in the fact that none of the rights of the indigenous people are granted to Jews. But I should explore this in my regular anti-Semitism digest. Canada was among the first countries to pass UNDRIP into law in 2021. Even prior to that, in 2019, British Columbia got ahead and was the very first province to legislate DRIPA, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. As part of DRIPA, the BC government adopted an Interpretation Amendment Act demanding that every single BC law complies with UNDRIP. Why is this a problem? Where do I begin? Article 19 of UNDRIP provides that any legislation that may have effect on Indigenous people is only ever passed after consultation with their representatives. Any law may affect any person in the province, so no law in BC can be passed without consultation with unelected representatives of the privileged less than 6% of the population. And it gets worse. Article 32 requires that any project affecting Indigenous people's land or territory or resources is approved by Indigenous people's representatives. So now the key question is, which land is Indigenous? And the answer is all of it. I understand that this is an utterly unbelievable statement, and this is why I recommend that you take the time to read Article 26 of UNDRIP to make sure I did not make this up. To make things even more preposterous, there are over 200 First Nations in BC. Some of their land claims overlap. Each band has its own chief and council or other governance structure and different laws. It is safe to say that we have reached a state of impasse. According to UNDRIP, which the BC government has legislated into provincial law, all land in BC belongs to Indigenous people, and 94% of British Columbians cannot own their land. Businesses don't own their land. The vast majority of our laws are invalid because they haven't been rewritten to comply with UNDRIP, and no new laws can be passed, and no new project can be approved. Now let's move on to some anecdotes. In 2008, a CBSA agent in the Vancouver airport told me, "Welcome to Canada." Less than a decade later, a first-grade public school teacher showed my Canadian-born son and his class a movie about Indigenous people being gracious hosts and everyone else being an unwanted guest. Back then, my son told me, "I didn't like the movie because it made me feel guilty and I haven't done anything wrong." Back then, I didn't read too much into it. But last spring, an MLA from Burnaby stood in the BC legislature and announced,
Even if we didn't personally cause colonization. We live in a country shaped by it. That's why many non-Indigenous people, including myself, use the term settler, uninvited guest, or for white folks who self-describe as colonizer. I am a settler. I was born here, but my family came from India through Canada's colonial immigration system, a country and system built on the displacement of Indigenous peoples. When we self-refer as settlers, it's a signal to Indigenous people that we understand the history of colonization. And I urge all members here to do the same.
Someone could argue, isn't it purely symbolic? First Nations suffered so much. How hard is it to say a land acknowledgement after all? A few months ago, Catherine Crones was suspended from her position as an elected school counselor with the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board following her respectful objection to the practice of land acknowledgement. The demand to repeat that we have no right to live where we live is humiliating, and the repeated mandatory humiliation is no longer symbolic. Freedom of speech implies the freedom not to say things. The only societies where an individual is obliged to say prescribed ceremonial words for fear of repercussions are either totalitarian or theocratic. And nothing grooms people into obedience more than accepting nonsense. A few months ago, Trudge Street in Vancouver was renamed, the street signs were replaced, and no one knows how to pronounce it. No one knows how to write it. Good luck calling 911 and giving your address. My heart goes out to the residents of the street who need to update their legal documents. It's an impossible mission because no website, including government websites, supports this alphabet. To mitigate this catch-22, the city temporarily added the translation of the new street name, Musqueam View. The street now has two sets of signs. The residents will have to change their legal documents twice, first to the interim name, and once the government agencies adapt, change all the documents again, this time to the First Nations name. The street name is pronounced Shmakviosam, and this isn't even the funniest part. The funniest part is that this isn't even a real First Nations alphabet. This is an artificial phonetic alphabet invented by linguists in academia. The First Nations in BC had no written language prior to contact with the Europeans. On a more serious note, Joffre Lakes Provincial Park is one of the most popular outdoor destinations in Metro Vancouver. On an average summer day, the park receives approximately 500 visitors. In the past years, the park has been subjected to prolonged closures in May, June, and September due to so-called cultural and spiritual practices of local nations. This is a trial balloon. This summer, shorter closures were introduced in other very popular parks. Remarkably, the nations are frustrated with the duration of Joffre Lakes Park closure. The park was closed for over a month in 2023, 60 days in 2024, and 68 days this year, but the First Nations have requested a 103-day-long closure, so they called the decision disappointing and disheartening and an inconsiderate continuation of colonial decision-making. In the 9 out of the 22 high-season weeks that the park was closed, approximately 30,000 visitors were prevented from enjoying the beautiful nature. For comparison, both nations number a little over 5,000 people. But the key problem isn't the tyranny of the minority, it's the hypocrisy. Why do white-only beaches and parks constitute racism, but Indigenous-only parks are considered reconciliation? Similarly, Indian reserves across BC are closed to non-Indigenous Canadians. Musqueam Reserve in Vancouver installed a no trespassing except on business and trespassers may be prosecuted sign between May 2014 and August 2015. The Squamish Nation in North Vancouver added do not trespass writing to their previous local traffic only signs around 2017 or 2018. Adams Lake Indian Band near Kamloops welcomes you with no trespassing, no illegal activity, no settlers sign. This is racial segregation. No matter one's opinion on Indigenous rights, no matter one's opinion on colonialism and the scale of the harms done to the Indigenous peoples in Canada, we should call it for what it is, and it is racial segregation. And we must understand that past racism cannot be fixed by course correcting to privilege a different race. In the next videos on the topic, we will go over provincial and federal budgets, land back deals in British Columbia, and more. Please share and subscribe. Thank you.